much. I appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to participate today. For our panel of business leaders, we've got to now go compete against all of those smart folks from the university. So we got to have our game on today. We're going to talk about a range of issues around decarbonization. And I'm going to quickly introduce the panel and let them give a few words on who they are and where they're coming from. And I'll let them do that introduction along the way. So let me start with Jonas Lee, who's the Chief Commercial Officer of CarbonCapture, Inc. Jonas, are you on?
Yep, I am. Can you see me and hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. So just a quick overview of the company. I won't bore the audience. I'll just sort of focus on the highlights. We are a direct air capture company. That's all we do. We filter CO2 out of the atmosphere using the kind of machines that you see in this image to the right here. The key thing is that we're both developing, manufacturing, and deploying them, and hopefully using that feedback loop so we can do all of those things better. We are based here in LA, in California. We are focused on US opportunities. Got a small team, but growing quickly. Have, for a startup, a relatively decent amount of cash to go do what we're doing. Actually just starting a process to raise some more for deployment. Some of you may have seen the announcement of Project Bison, which will be the largest DAC facility, well, the largest DAC facility yet announced. I'm hopeful it inspires others to launch even larger projects, because even 5 megatons a year is a small drop in the bucket. And I guess the last thing to note is that the IRA has had a massive impact on our business. The Inflation Reduction Act has both direct subsidies for DAC as well as clean energy subsidies that power things like DAC, both of those combined in our business. I'll just show some images now. You want to flip the page here? I think maybe the main thing about us that's different than other approaches to filtering CO2 out of the atmosphere is that we've taken what's called a modular open systems architecture approach. So everything starts with a carbon sponge or a sorbent. Those sorbents are packaged into cartridges, which then are placed into reactors. And you kind of see where this is going. These reactors are then multiplied into modules that are generally container sized. So, 40 foot by 8 by 9.5 feet tall. Those modules then can be stacked together in clusters for shared services. And then, of course, clusters can be put together in large arrays. So essentially, we're going big by going small. And what's important about this approach is, I guess, two main things with a lot of sub-bullets under each of them. One is flexibility. So you have site flexibility. You have sort of a cement plant that needs direct air capture, has very different requirements than just a large giant storage field. And also more importantly, you can mass produce. And once you're mass producing something as opposed to stick building, then you can bring down costs fairly rapidly because you can iterate design. But these sorbents go into cartridges, which go into reactors. That's sort of that first row is the science piece, and then everything after that is basically hardcore engineering. And what this allows us to do with this approach, though, is on the cartridge and sorbent side, be able to take different sorbents, generally classes of amines and MOFs and hybrids that have the same type of energy desorption, heat of desorption, vacuum, airflow, et cetera, but this unlocks literally thousands of potential compounds to be used as carbon sponges, because our belief is that the best carbon sponge has not yet been invented, and probably 20 years from now we'll be saying the same thing. And so we want to make sure we are future-proofed. I'm almost done, so let me just show a few quick images just to inspire the imagination. So here are an array of clusters. Each one of those, see the container-sized module being lifted into place. It's probably not going to be as easy as a rendering here shows it to be, but it gives you an idea of what this would look like in deployment. If you switch to another page here, just a kind of a close-up of these container-sized modules sharing services. And I think I'll just end on the next one, which I think it's Project Bison. So Project Bison is a big project we put together with Frontier Carbon Solutions as a sequestration storage partner in Wyoming. So it's a site and a storage partner and a location. We like Wyoming because they have primacy for obtaining Class 6 wells. They have excellent geology for storing CO2 that we capture, and also good for wind, for decent for solar. And the environment in the other kind of climate, the business climate in Wyoming is very, very favorable to the energy transition overall. So that's a quick set of highlights. I'm happy to answer any questions that we go through later in the conversation.
All right, I appreciate it, Jonas. And with that, I'm going to move on to our next panelist, William Swetra. I think I'm hopefully saying it right, William, who's the Senior Policy Analyst with Oxy.
You got that right, Eric. Not many people do on the first try. So
there you go.
Yeah. Well, hi, everybody. William Swetra, Senior Policy Advisor with Oxy Low Carbon Ventures. I want to thank USEA for hosting the event and inviting me to join. Y'all are such an indispensable resource and positive voice for the energy sector. So thanks for all you do. For those who don't know, Oxy is a large energy company with a global and domestic footprint. I was fortunate enough to join in 2014 and have been with Low Carbon Ventures since its inception in 2018, working all things dealing with carbon capture policy and regulations. And Low Carbon Ventures' mission is to develop and commercialize innovative new technologies that provide value and decrease emissions with a focus on direct air capture and permanent carbon storage. Next slide, Dominic. And one more, please. Thank you. So, at Oxy, we recognize the significant challenge that climate change poses and are fully committed to be a part of the solution. And this attitude really permeates the entire organization. Several years ago, we set a comprehensive net zero target by 2050 that includes scope 1, 2, and 3. So our goal includes the use of our product. And our pathway to achieve net zero really relies heavily upon our existing capabilities and experience from 50 years of injecting and storing CO2, and advancing, some innovative technologies that I'll talk about. Next slide, Dominic. So to realize this vision, Oxy Low Carbon Ventures formed 1.5, a development company to deploy a range of carbon capture technologies and innovative decarbonization solutions. And I think this slide gives a really nice snapshot of the various pathways 1.5 is pursuing. They're working to deploy direct air capture and point source capture projects. Captured CO2 can be permanently stored in geologic formations, that can produce carbon removal credits for various industries. Atmospheric CO2 can be combined with green hydrogen to form a drop-in compatible diesel or jet fuel with significant emission reduction factors when compared to conventional fuels. By pairing direct air capture with enhanced oil recovery, you can produce net zero oil by injecting and storing more CO2 than is produced in the life cycle of the produced barrel. CO2 can also be utilized to produce low carbon products like cement. Next slide, Dominic. So let's dive into direct air capture, a technology that many, if not all, climate models say is essential to achieving climate goals. 1.5 is set to deploy carbon engineering direct air capture technology. Up in Squamish, British Columbia, Carbon Engineering built their Innovation Center, which is the largest dedicated direct air capture research and development facility in the world. This provides us with an environment where our engineers can conduct ongoing technology development, testing, and optimization of carbon engineering's DAC technology to enable wider deployment faster. 1.5 is partnering with Worley, a world-leading engineering procurement and construction company, to bring our first DAC facility in the Permian Basin of Texas into reality. And I would be remiss if I did not mention just how important the first movers pictured here on the screen are to making direct air capture viable, and how important the voluntary market, will continue to be as we aim to bring more DAC facilities online in the coming years. One example, we partnered with aerospace leader Airbus, who pre-purchased the capture and permanent sequestration of 100,000 tons of CO2 from the atmosphere each year for 4 years. This support and recognition of DAC as a vital decarbonization solution is really critical for the success of the technology. Next slide. So in August, we announced the first stage of construction, which is super exciting for me and for everybody at OLCV in 1.5. On what will be the world's largest direct air capture facility in the Permian Basin at 500,000 tons per year, with the capability to scale to 1 million tons per year with an expected startup date of late 2024. Next slide. So during our Investor Day meeting in the spring, we announced our ambition to have between 70 and 130 5 DAC plants online by 2035, with both of these, targets obviously being greatly influenced by supportive public policy incentives and the growth of various markets. Next slide. And lastly here, 1.5 also plans to develop carbon storage hubs all across the country with 3 dedicated sequestration hubs expected to be online by 2025. A hub is a storage site or multiple storage sites with multiple injection and monitoring wells that will receive CO2 from multiple emitters using shared carbon transport infrastructure. And our vision is for some of these hubs to be anchored by direct air capture CO2 volumes. This hub design helps bring down the cost and de-risk the whole system and allows emitters to focus only on capturing the emissions. So the early pitfalls of the single source to single carbon sink, which was an early model for carbon capture projects, can be avoided. And I'll just add that it's paramount that storage sites are well chosen, well characterized, and monitored to ensure that we are achieving what we say we are, which is the permanent storage of CO2. I'll end it there and look forward to questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, William. Well, on capture, one more speaker, Lee Stockwell, who's the general manager of the U.S. carbon capture, utilization, and storage business for Shell. So I'll bring Lee up to the dais, the virtual dais here, and there we go.
Hey, Eric, how are you?
I'm good.
Great. I'm going to buck the trend and not show any slides and just maybe talk for a moment. The current events that we see in Russia, or the Russian aggression in Ukraine, along with the storms that are moving through the Caribbean, they demonstrate the complexity of the energy trilemma we're facing, right? The need to balance energy security for globally increasing population, the energy transition to help us impact climate change, and then the affordability of it to ensure everyone will have the appropriate access. Shell, like many other companies like Oxy just mentioned, countries and municipalities are all committed to reaching net zero. And I think we're starting in our communities here in the US. We have major decarbonization projects announced in southeastern Louisiana around the footprint that we have there, as well as the Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia tri-state area. And those include CCS and hydrogen, as well as low carbon feedstocks, chemicals, and products. And the intent there is not just to decarbonize our own footprint, but to help the communities that we're in to take a major step forward towards that net zero ambition. In Europe, we see CCS developments in the North Sea, as well as funding 300 megawatts worth of clean hydrogen projects that will be online in the coming years. Shell's view is that net zero means that we'll have to continue to develop and demonstrate technologies like CCS in places like the Quest project that we operate in Canada, which just achieved its 7-year anniversary and has safely injected 7 million tons over that time period. And if you think about it from the perspective of the IPCC report, CCS and DAC carbon capture technologies, we're going to have to bring on a 1 million ton per year project every 3.5 days for the next 30 years, which, if you just look at the surface, means that we're already behind. And if we're already behind, that means we have to develop and deploy novel technologies to lower cost and accelerate the pace. Shell's committed to continuing to drive the development of CO2 point source capture. We have our own proprietary technology, direct air capture, where we're both developing in-house and helping to fund new technology startups, clean hydrogen, wind, solar, and of course utilization, which will play a role as markets develop in things like methane pyrolysis or sustainable aviation fuels. And we do that through our internal technology development, again, through our own ventures arm, which we invest quite a bit of money to help technologies and small startups leverage their speed and agility, which a company the size of Shell may struggle to do in getting to the market and helping to play that out. I think Shell's view ultimately, though, is that net zero is a goal that requires collaboration, and collaboration on an unprecedented scale, and potentially between parties that haven't traditionally worked together. And I think events like this from the USEA and others create an opportunity for us to begin to sit side by side and understand what it will take to move that needle forward at a pace that will deliver carbon capture and other technologies for cleaner energy solutions towards a net zero solution by 2050. I'll pause there, Eric, and hand it back to you.
No, that's greatly appreciated. And so we've had 3 folks from the world of carbon capture. I'm going to bring in an adjacent voice, I'll call it, Carol Lane is Vice President of Government Affairs for X-Energy. So they're working on next generation nuclear solutions. And so, Carol, if I can bring you to the forefront.
Y'all hear me?
Yes, we hear you now.
Okay, good. So I'm really pleased to be here and excited to talk about nuclear energy. X-Energy is a reactor design and fuel manufacturing company that was started in 2009. And then in October of 2020, we won one of the Department of Energy's two advanced reactor demonstration program. It's it's actually a $2.4 billion program that's split 50-50 with the government contribution as 1.2, and then we need to raise $1.2 billion to build the first advanced nuclear facility in the state of Washington by 2028. And I'll talk a little bit more about why Washington in a moment. We do believe that as a zero emission energy source that is always on and geographically flexible, that we're really pleased to see that nuclear energy and particularly small modular reactors are being accepted as part of the clean energy solution. Just to put a little perspective on it, we're from the state of Maryland. Nuclear energy makes up 82% of the clean energy in the state of Maryland with one nuclear plant. So nuclear energy can play a very powerful role in decarbonizing. And we do think it's really a unique time in terms of being the nexus of environmental consciousness, political alignment, and breakthrough technologies. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I always like to start with our fuel because people think of the big reactors that we have as our existing fleet. We are a high temperature gas reactor. This pebble represents our fuel. Inside this graphite pebble is about 17,000 kind of chia seed size kernels or particles, and the uranium is contained within those particles. So what's really different is that these pebbles become really, if you will, the containment vessel for the fissile material. The Idaho National Lab has spent the past 15 years testing these particles, irradiating them, doing the analysis, and each of those chia seed pebble particles really contain or retain about 99.999% of the fissile materials. So the Department of Energy has called this the most robust fuel on Earth. So these pebbles go into a reactor core, about 220,000 of them. You can think of them as a giant gumball machine, and the pebbles float, kind of move through gravity as their fuel is used up. All the way from the top of the reactor to the bottom. Our reactor is about an 80 megawatt reactor. And then for an economic offering, we are looking at what we call a 4-pack of about 320 megawatts, which is about the size of many coal and natural gas plants. So why are we in the state of Washington? We're really there because in 2019, the state of Washington passed their Clean Energy Transformation Act, which mandated they get off coal by 2026, be zero carbon, and be zero carbon on the grid by 2045. So the utility out there, Energy Northwest, had an independent study done. They have about 50% of their energy right now is from hydro, about 25% coal and gas, and then some wind and solar, and they have one nuclear plant currently. And the independent study really said that if they wanted to meet their energy goals by the year 2030, they needed to increase their nuclear capacity. So they agreed to be our partner for this advanced reactor demonstration facility project that we're doing for the Department of Energy. Just a couple of other points. So this is not your typical, what you think of as the last generation of reactors. One of the things our reactor does is load follow. So we can go from 100% down to 40% and ramp back up to 100% in less than 15 minutes. This makes it very compatible with renewables and allows a lot of flexibility for the utilities to manipulate their grid according to their power needs. So there's a lot of attractiveness to that. The other thing we see is as we're looking at retiring coal plants, you sometimes have a mismatch between where those coal plants are and, they're not necessarily the ideal places for renewables, solar and wind. And so it's really difficult to just swap them out. So land use becomes a very important thing as we move forward in terms of energy density and what level of land you take and are willing to employ for the different sources of energy as we move to a more decarbonized world. And then lastly, I would just say that one of the unique aspects of our plant as well is that as a byproduct of, so we flow helium through our reactor. We do not use water. The helium is what generates the electricity, and it generates high quality steam. So, about 1/3 of the energy in this country is used by the industrial sector. It's used in almost every kind of manufacturing, from gasoline and automobiles to buildings, machineries, lots of different things. And we aren't going to achieve our goals if we really don't decarbonize the industrial sector. So nuclear can play a very important role here, and in providing process heat for a lot of the industrial processes for making the goods that we use every day. So some of you, I'll just end with, we did make an announcement a couple weeks ago of a memorandum of understanding with Dow to look at nuclear energy to support their process heat applications. And so I'll just end with that.
Oh, that's fascinating. I think if you say nuclear, to me, I think power for sure. But thinking about it as heat is that's a little expansive. And the locational thing, I just came back from RE Plus, and one of the big conversations is about interconnect and how do you build new plant and zero carbon energy, but if you don't have transmission interconnect to move the power around, it's a little tough. So if you can exploit existing facilities, existing transmission distribution networks, that's a handy tool as well. Well, I'm gonna kind of loop back and bring the audience, bring our group back in, and I'll just put some prompt questions. I think to kind of move things along briskly, I'll call out somebody to take the question to start, but certainly everybody on the panel is welcome to jump in and add to that conversation as appropriate. So Jonas, maybe let's go back to you. Carbon sequestration has been talked about for a long time and has been anticipated in many ways, but it's been a little slower to the uptake, I think, than some people would have expected or maybe hoped. I'm curious, why do you think that is? Why has this been slower to ramp than maybe we would have wanted?
You mean just on the sequestration side, or you mean on the point source capture or direct air capture side?
I think it's really the connection of the whole thing. You've got the end-to-end of both capture and then sequestration.
I think it's probably better people to talk about point source than me, because we're just focused on direct air capture. But direct air capture should be noted as an emerging technology. And 10 years ago, before the cost of renewables had come down as much as it had, it would have been a much harder economic argument to make. We are benefiting not only from the technology advances and how to do it more cheaply, but also the natural progression of renewable resources. They're getting cheaper every year. Last year was the most expensive. Next year will be the cheapest. So that's probably part of the big secular reason that it hasn't been big up until recently. But also the other piece is just demand. I mean, I think the world has now kind of recognized that this is a problem that we have to address with money and talent and action. And a lot of people recognized it 10 years ago, but now I think most people recognize it. Not everybody, but most.
Well, maybe just to the point you made, maybe William, let me pull you in on that, because you guys are working across both direct capture and point source capture. Is there something that you've seen a barrier, or maybe it's the cost, the lowering cost of renewables to drive this is a big part of it, to the point that Jonas just made. But any thoughts on why this has gone slower than maybe we would have hoped?
Speaking outside of enhanced oil recovery, because of course we've been doing that for quite some time, but the DOE regional partnerships have been looking at CO2 sequestration for 20 years and have drilled wells and injected CO2 in various basins across the country with success. And, we also have some international examples. The Swetra project in the North Sea has been injecting since 1996. But of course, carbon capture is an integrated system. You need all the pieces. You need capture, transport, and storage to be ready.
Right.
And this is that oft chicken and egg problem where a capture project can't go forward without a storage solution and vice versa. But I'd like to say that we're turning the corner, as highlighted by the wave of recent project announcements. So I do not want to say it's progressed more slowly than expected, but I will say I believe this is carbon capture's moment. The conversation around climate change and the need to reduce emissions that has gained significant momentum in recent years, which puts a bigger spotlight on decarbonization technologies, coupled with, recent public policy support, which has made a lot more of these projects economic than weren't maybe with the previous levels of 45Q, especially the more dilute streams from industrial sources like steel, which are going to be incredibly important to capture. So I believe we're on the cusp of a big industry here, as long as we act in good faith and effectively communicate the message around the safety of CO2 storage, and show the potential benefits for host communities that are going to have storage projects in their jurisdictions.
No, I certainly feel I agree with the comment both you and Jonas made that a lot of the things across the whole spectrum of decarbonization have been talked about for a long time. And the conference I just came back from in Orange County, everybody's like, "Wow, it's actually really happy. We got to do it now." It's there is a marked shift in attitudes towards these things for sure.
Yeah, let me just add one quick comment that I think is something that's stuck with a lot of people who've been in this business for a while, is that everyone's saying now you're in the right place at the right time, which basically means a lot of us have been in the wrong place for a long time. So things are finally shifting around.
I feel you. I've been in this since 1996, and we spent the first 10 years answering the question: is there really a problem to solve? Maybe because we just touched on it, and I'll throw this out to the whole group and we'll go around the horn, because certainly the recent legislative support, most specifically on the IRA, but some of the other bills and things that have been passed as well around the 48C and 45Q incentives and other things as well. I'm just curious if each of you can kind of go around the horn, and maybe Lee, we'll start with you to maybe kick us off here. What impact do you think that has on your business and your plans going forward?
Maybe to tag on to what Will said before, the policy support creates massive tailwinds for what it is that we're doing. If I were to give you an order of magnitude number for the U.S. projects that we're considering just in CCS, it has over $1 billion worth of impact. So clearly a large driver there, and would be for anyone in this space. And I think it's to be applauded. One issue that you run into with that is supply side, right? It creates a lot of opportunities on the supply, and I think many of us are having conversations around how we do that. On the demand side, there's still work to be done. And I think you touch a little bit, we'll touch a little bit on the more dilute streams. How do you manage to look at the harder to abate, where even $85 a ton doesn't quite get to the point where you can cover what it is that you're looking at. And there's a something between $85 and the $180 a ton that direct air capture brings, where there's still solutions that need to be created, and largely that's on the demand front. And that can be done through government procurement contracts, for instance, where you say, look, we would like, we're the largest purchaser, the government is the largest purchaser of cement, right? Can they purchase a quantity of low carbon cement, similar with steel and other industries? How this end user market comes along becomes your next opportunity there. But the facilitation of 45Q for our industry is fantastic. The clarifications that were made in 2020 or 2018 really opened the door for how do we take those steps forward. And you started seeing projects come along, and now the IRA and the Infrastructure Act a year prior both really emphasize the opportunity to move now. Because I agree with Will's point. This is the moment of carbon capture.
No, I agree with that. Jonas, let's stick with the carbon capture crowd for the moment. Any additional thoughts on 48C or 45Q or?
Yeah, it made my day, or it made my week, it made my month. It might have made my year, actually. We expected it to come one day, just sort of like one day you hope to have a really good birthday party that somebody remembers, and but no, this was This is a bombshell in a good way, whatever the opposite of bombshell is. And it is essentially, so for us, 45Q is $180 plus clean energy credits you need to drive our systems. So it's actually more than $180 per ton of CO2 captured and permanently stored. And the way we look at that is essentially a long-term offtake agreement. So the government has signed up essentially to be a buyer. Now, it is not technically an offtake agreement and all that, but it is a long-term source of revenue that can be counted upon, not by just us to make our own investment decisions, but by the financiers at the project level, the debt players. This is a really, really big deal for them. And it eliminates a tremendous amount of risk. It's now our job to get costs down, so $180 plus some for the energy is profitable. So we can build as many of these as we can.
Makes sense. William, anything to add to that? If not, I'll ask Carol to jump in. And obviously, those are the numbers for carbon capture, but there's incentives and goodies in here for next generation nuclear as well.
Yeah, there are. There's a couple of really interesting things. So what Department of Energy did with the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program was really to focus on the engineering and licensing risk, if you will, of new reactors. So, we're kind of in the situation where lots of people are interested in the second reactor plant that you build, not so many in the first one. So the Department of Energy's role in the 50-50 cost share with us is very important in terms of reducing the front end risk, which in our case in particular is but nuclear's is the engineering side and the licensing side. What the production tax credit and investment tax credit really did was two things. One is that it included as a technology neutral provision, it included nuclear as part of a clean energy solution, which was really important. But we are not the operators actually of the reactors. And so those two, the combination, depending on the situation with utilities or even the industrial buyers, but those two tax provisions really make the construction and the back end of the risk much more attractive and reduce the impact in terms of any increase in terms of taxpayers and the rates that utilities have to pay. So it was a really good combination of mixing it with what had been done on the technology side with really who the customer community is and who will really reap the benefits of the production and investment tax credits. So we see that as really positive, and I know a number of the utilities that we've talked to or industrial players are really looking forward to benefiting from that.
No, makes sense. And one thing across all of these technologies and certainly other renewables and other parts of the bill is I agree with you entirely, Carol, that the technology neutrality of the bill I think is really great. It kind of just says, hey, go help solve the problem, and whatever your tool is to go do that is encouraged. And the other thing, at least that I've seen as I've talked to other people across the industry, is that the marginal economic accelerant that this puts into the discussion hopefully helps everybody drive volumes to get to some of those cost outs that people have referred to here. We've got to do these things at 10 times the efficacy and 1/10 the cost at time to get to the scale that we need to do, and hopefully this really sparks the volumes that help everybody get on the learning curves to drive the cost out of their various solutions. I'll come back and maybe William, I'll throw this one to you. But when we talk about carbon capture and storage, how do we know it's safe? How do we know I'll say it works? If we sequester this carbon, how do we know as we go through that journey that it's safe and effective and really working?
Thanks, Eric. This is a really important question, because if carbon capture is to play a significant role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which all leading institutions think it must, injected CO2 will need to be permanently retained in underground formations and kept out of the atmosphere. And it's also an important lever for public trust and acceptance of CO2 storage. So which naturally leads to the question that you just asked, how do you know it's safe? And how do you know that you can permanently store in the subsurface? And just a few points to make on that question here. So first, oil and gas and other fluids and even CO2 have been trapped underground in geologic formations for millions of years. What this proves is that there are deep geologic formations that have significant barriers or impermeable cap rocks that exist that will impede fluids from reaching the surface. So, as an example, many of the world's petroleum basins have or offer retention times longer than 10 million years. Second, industry has a ton of experience injecting fluids and building injection wells. At Oxy, we've been doing that for nearly 50 years as a part of our enhanced oil recovery operations with really, really minimal CO2 loss. So we know how to characterize these sites to ensure, that they can properly handle the amount of injected CO2 and monitor the sites to ensure containment. So, our analysis, extensive peer-reviewed literature, and, operational experience to date, like our EOR experience, like the Sleipner project I referenced earlier, find that the risk of CO2 storage out of the complex to the atmosphere or into underground sources of drinking water is really well understood. We can mitigate it, we can quantify that risk, and that risk decreases with time. And ultimately, it's quite small for well-selected, well-managed locations that follow regulatory standards and best management practice. And just two more quick points. And the regulations governing CO2 storage in the United States are quite rigorous, and they really do promote proper site selection management and site closure. Just one example, the California CCS protocols, only sites that prove CO2 retention in the occurrence to exceed 99% over 100 years post-injection will be eligible under the program. So this is a really strong requirement. And, lastly, it's important that we as a carbon storage industry transparently report on the volumes that we store. We've developed 3 monitor verification plans that are approved by EPA that are required to claim the 45Q tax credit that do just that. It's a long-winded response, but I think a message that's super important to get out there to again build trust and confidence that this activity can be performed safely.
I agree with that. Jonas or Leah, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say I'm kind of thankful for the oil industry for having figured this stuff out and being able to contribute to the EPA being able to regulate these wells appropriately so that they are safe. We as an industry are all going to draw upon that knowledge because there are, I don't know, maybe you guys know how many wells are now under application lines, under the line of applications at the EPA. I think it's like 30 to 40 right now. But those would not be possible without all these years of experience in how to do this right.
Lee, anything from you, or are we?
Yeah, I would love to add something just to Will and Jonas's comments. Maybe the thought that CO2 is hazardous, I think, is the other component. We have been doing this for a while. I think the industry has created a lot of practices and standards on how to handle and transport, inject, and store CO2 in large quantities, and we're going to rely on that. But I think the other piece is that CO2 is actually something that we all deal with in quantity every day. And it's something that we all recognize that we need to remove from the atmosphere. But I do want to maybe underscore the fact that it isn't a hazardous material. It is something that we understand very well, that we know the safety procedures and protocols for. And if you look at projects like Quest that I mentioned, have been operating for 7 years, very safely, we understand kind of the risk profile of that. And relative to many other types of technologies, I think it is very low risk.
That's an interesting take. Carol, let me loop back to you on a slightly tangential topic, though. I work in the renewable and energy storage side, and one of the things that always kind of makes me scratch my head is when we talk about new nuclear and the role as a zero carbon generation technology, it always seems to come across as an either or, right? It's either this one or that one. And I'm just curious to get your take on how nuclear and renewables kind of come together and how that becomes a more complementary part of the solution.
So let me talk a little bit about our reactor, and it has to do with the idea We flow, as said, helium through our reactor, and then that comes out and generates electricity. So we are able to load follow, which is very similar to coal and natural gas plants. So that really is what makes the difference in terms of allowing it to really align and work well for utilities from the grid standpoint. It may not be the most efficient to run a nuclear reactor at 40% all the time, but depending on what the load is, what they need, what the timing is, what other things a utility might have on a grid, it actually does work really well. And what we do, which is also a little bit different, we do not change the temperature in the reactor. So we're not having the reactor go up and down in terms of thermal sensitivity. It's really done on the steam generator side, which is more the conventional side of the plant, which again is very similar to coal and gas. And so from that standpoint, we're able to mimic that a little more than, or much more than nuclear plants have been able to in the past.
So is that what drives the economic difference? You hear a lot about that this next generation of reactors is going to be a lot more economic. Is that what's underlying the economic models?
No, it's really driving the economics is the size of them. So, right now, the big 1,000 megawatt plants, we actually build them and assemble them at the site. Lots of construction issues, lots of really kind of going through the process every time differently. With the small reactors, what we're all really trying to aim for is to have components so you can, one, build in the factory and then transport it and just really assemble it at the plant site. So our reactors are able to fit on the back of a truck or train and get it to that site. So it's a combination of that. We are looking for making sure that our subsystems, we have at least 2 suppliers for. So that's something in terms of making sure you've got a supply chain that's competitive. A lot of times, when you're only building a big nuclear plant once every 15 or 20 years, I mean, you really run into supply issues in terms of keeping that supply chain alive and healthy. And so we look at that as a very important aspect of it. And then the third part is the ability to, because of the size and because you're building it at the site itself, you're able to characterize the size better. You're able to go through the licensing process, we believe, a lot quicker after you get through the first one, hopefully. And so that also reduces the price, or the cost. The advanced nuclear industry is very much working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in terms of building multiples of modules and having to look at licensing a different way than they have in the past. So it's a combination of all those things.
No, that's really helpful. And it totally resonates with me, the idea of being able to build in the factory. Bespoke things built out in the world are always fantastically more expensive than things you can build in a standardized way. I was thinking about that with Jonas's slides at the beginning of the session, and the building block approach of getting to scalability, but doing that with really standardized products is that's something that you can look at lots of other technologies, including solar and wind. That's part of how they've gotten their costs down, is just drive volume through standardization of production throughout the system.
If I could just add one more.
Sure.
I just wanted to add one more thing. The last component, which I forgot to mention, is that we've really separated what we call the nuclear island from the conventional island. So the turbines and the steam generators and are really the conventional island, and we're really using off-the-shelf technology for that as well. That would be standard, say, for natural gas plants.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, if there are people that are interested in modularization of industrial production of stuff in general, there's a great paper written by a guy named Klaus Lackner, And it doesn't mention direct air capture at all, but he's sort of the father of direct air capture too. pretty smart guy. I read the paper and was shocked to see Klaus Lachter's name on the masthead. But yeah, if anybody is particularly interested in the advantages of modularization, that's a great paper.
Oh, I'm going to look that one up, because that literally, I think it affects my business and the energy storage business, and playing off of something that Carol just shared, we went and kind of shamelessly stole ideas from the oil refining business, because there's a huge amount of expertise around the system side of the business that you can take and repeat. It's a different technology, different application at its core, but all of those peripheral systems things are pretty similar to things that we know how to do at scale. Before we kind of get to the wrap up, because I want to be sensitive to the time, I'd love to just go around the horn. We talked a little bit about the IRA and the infrastructure bill and all of these great incentives, but getting these economic models that drive both the production costs down and create demand on the other side are always really important. And we all work in a very heavily regulated industry. So I'm just curious, if you were in charge for a day and you could change one thing about either the economic model or the regulatory model that you think would really accelerate the adoption of your business, what would that be? Who's brave? Who wants to take it on?
I think
Start.
go ahead, Carol.
So I'm gonna start with the regulatory side, because the uncertainty having to do with licensing is a key component to raising money, investment, and giving confidence. I will say, to Congress's credit, Congress over the past 5 years has been what I would call policy forward with respect to advanced nuclear. I think they're really ahead of public perception, which isn't often the case. And they did put in place a framework for what they called a Nuclear Energy Modernization Act, which was to try and get the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to recognize the inherent safety features of advanced nuclear and to do it differently than light water reactors. If we can't change the licensing process and get it down to 2 or 3 years, which is what we think we can build these things in, following that, we're not going to be successful. So we and others in the advanced nuclear field have been working on that pretty hard, but it's trying to get them to look at the commensurate risk, risk-informed approach that's technology transparent in terms of the different types of advanced reactors, and we've got to get the licensing right. So that's really a key component for us from an economic standpoint.
And I'll hop in next, and just want to say, the 45Q enhancements have certainly pushed our deployment scenario, closer to that higher value that I showed of 135 plants online by 2035. And it's truly a leading incentive for the deployment of direct air capture in the world. But I think it's important to also note that our deployment scenario is domestic and global deployment figures. So the growth of policy incentives, in jurisdictions outside the U.S. will be really critical for DAC deployment. We've had a lot of recent victories. The Department of Energy has a ton of money for this technology. One thing I'll say, as I think, and Lee kind of touched on this a bit, and I wholeheartedly agree that, procurement is going to be a really interesting policy space moving forward to help grow the market for direct air capture. But I also think, the growth of voluntary carbon markets and its recognition of DAC as a vital decarbonization solution will be another important lever. There's some 5,000 companies today committed to net zero that are potential buyers of what I will dub carbon removal credits to reach their net zero goals. But, I'll note it's important that companies focus on reducing emissions as much as they can as a first step, but many industries will always have some residual emissions that they can't eliminate, and DAC provides, a good solution there. But, for the voluntary carbon market to be what I think folks think it could be, there has to be integrity and strong monitor and verification processes around those credits that are sold in voluntary carbon markets. So again, the public has confidence that emission reductions, that are being bought and sold are exactly that. And without public trust and support, we risk these technologies, not achieving the scale that is needed to combat climate change. And then lastly, I'll just say the growth of compliance markets as well. So like California's LCFS that, recognize direct air capture will be, another important piece to achieving, our higher deployment scenario, and just more broadly, more technologies, from the decarbonization perspective entering the marketplace.
And the great thing about being on a panel with such esteemed panelists is that they say everything that you want to say before you say them. And so Will touched on, maybe you gave us one, I was going to say three. He touched on two of them: the market, the establishment of the market, and then I think the credit markets itself. So how do you drive low carbon products, and then how do you step forward with these carbon markets, both voluntary and compliant? So I agree completely with those. Maybe a bit more tactical is the permitting side. Jeff Brown out of Energy Futures had done recently a study, and it looked at the permitting process for a standard pick and off the shelf technology that you're looking to deploy, and the permitting process is very linear. But if you look at the permitting process for a carbon project, you've got three different streams that are all very difficult, from the underground storage Class 6, the transport pipeline component, and if that transport pipeline is interstate, it adds complexity. And then lastly, you have the capture itself, be it direct air or a point source capture, and the Title V associated with it, et cetera. So these processes, they all come together, and they make the permitting side of this fairly difficult. And if you want to deploy at scale, you're going to have to figure out a way for that to either be streamlined or to facilitate it in some manner. So that would be the one I would add, maybe, to the comments that William already added.
Yeah, and I'll try to also add something tactical, just because. But I'm sort of running the risk of being an ungrateful person, because we did get a lot in the last set of, it's also the bipartisan law that put $3.5 billion toward 4 DAC regional hubs, and that was a big gift. I don't want to say gift is the wrong word, but it was a big boost. We'll see how it gets deployed. But I'd say tactically, things like direct pay versus having to structure a tax equity deal, it seems like a weight that is easily changed or lifted by a stroke of a pen. That may be naive on my part, but I'd rather have to worry about the technology and the deployment and community engagement than tax equity.
Amen to that.
Okay, good. I'm not the only one.
Yeah, I listen, and it's scattered across the IRA. There's some direct pays in certain circumstances, but a lot of places, and as I understand it, there was a lot of resistance across certain members of Congress in moving to direct pay. So we'll have to work that out. Hopefully, we'll all get better at it. That it'll be cheaper, easier, and our friends in the finance world and the legal world will help us do that in a more expedited way.
If we can't solve the climate change problem because of tax equity, that's on us.
That's it. Exactly. Well, we've only got just a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to go back with a speed round of just any last thoughts that people have, or a thing that we didn't get to on the panel that you'd really like people to know. I'm going to coin a phrase just playing off of what all of you said. We've got to renew in terms of renewable energy, and then recapture anything that we can't solve through the first two problems. So that's going to be my takeaway for the thing. But this has been a great panel. Jonas, why don't you wrap us up, and we'll go through the order we introduced: Jonas, William, Lee, and Carol.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo some of the things I've heard in other conferences this year, which is that this is not there's no one big goal that scores the touchdown wins the game. It's 1,000 shots on goal. It's everybody doing their best in a competitive, but also in a weird, I don't know if there's a name for this, but like competitive but cooperative. Everybody on this
co-opetition
can work together.
Co-opetition, it's a word.
There you go. But it's even better than we can make money together. If we fail, but the industry succeeds, I'm still a happy person, and I think that's a sentiment that's often echoed across my colleagues in this industry.
And I'll just end by saying, there's a tremendous amount of energy and excitement around the carbon dioxide removal space. Obviously, energized by the IRA, by the infrastructure bill, So it's on us to go out there and deploy these projects effectively and with equity and community interest at heart. We can certainly tackle this problem. We have the know-how, so it's about getting out there and doing it effectively. And the conversation around policy and things that we may need in the future is always going to be evolving and ongoing, which is the exciting part. But we have the toolkit now to get out there and get going.
Maybe just a comment that we've never had more momentum than we have now. But going back to the IPCC report, 1 million tons a day needs to come online every 3.5 days for 30 years. So we still have an amazing amount of work to do to increase the pace and move at scale, and it's going to require collaboration. And I know, Jonas, you mentioned it. It's going to require collaboration across the board. It's going to have to cut between sectors. It's going to have to cut between disciplines, and we're going to need everyone around the table to really put our shoulder into that level of momentum.
Carol, bring us home.
Well, I just to comment on what Lee just said in terms of the amount that we have to achieve to be able to get to the decarbonization is really enormous. And while I often see the passion in the nuclear industry for its contribution to it, I'm always struck when I'm on panels that are broader and cross energy sources and technologies and solutions of how much passion there is to really make this happen. So, I mean, I really think, and I think there was some discussion earlier about the portfolio's effect of what's really needed to bring all of these technologies to bear to really accomplish the goals we're trying to accomplish.
Great. Well, I appreciate it. And I appreciate all of the panelists' participation and good thoughts here. I learned a bunch. I hope other folks on the call did. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Sheila, and the USEA team to finish up the last segment of the conference.
Thanks.